The man here with us, of course, senior advocate, Supreme Court of India, member, Parliament, Rajya Sabha into his fourth term, eminent jurist, and of course, served as a former Additional Solicitor General of India and former chair of the Parliamentary Standing Committees on Commerce, Law, and Home. In case I've forgotten a few, kindly do excuse me. He's widely regarded as one of India's leading senior counsels, having been the youngest designated senior advocate in India at the age of just 34 and the youngest additional solicitor general at 37. Educated at St. Columba's School, St. Stephen's College, and Trinity College, Cambridge, where he completed his law degree and PhD with a summer program at Harvard University. Ladies and gentlemen, also an author and a respected public commentator on constitutional and public affairs. I needn't have said so much. The name itself is more than enough. Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, sir. It's an honor to have you here with us and an honor to hear you speak.
The Chancellor, Mr. Vishwanathan, my good friend Mr. Ram, the editor, the CEO, the other distinguished persons on the dais, members of this august distinguished audience, above all, students, faculty members, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for a very generous and possibly partially undeserved introduction. I find that the topic today is a general one. It is supposed to be inspiring, a little rhetorical, a little uplifting, but doesn't deal with the nitty-gritties of law, which the Chancellor has raised in his speech. So I think a good via media is found by a proposed Q&A at the end of the thematic lecture, where some of these more nitty-gritty problems can be discussed. Friends, my first dilemma is that those who have formulated the theme for this inaugural, which is, as you can see, law, leadership, and nation building, the responsibility of young lawyers. Those who formulated this theme necessarily want me to be sermonizing to young lawyers. Personally, I hate the didactic approach, but willy-nilly will have to do some of it today. I have actually for long believed that youngsters are getting smarter and smarter and not in need of any didactic sermonizing. And indeed, when I sit on some interview boards, I've sat on many earlier, I increasingly get the feeling that the interviewee is far ahead of the interviewer. Of course, we then tend to take refuge in the deeming fiction that our experience trumps everything else. Friends, especially young friends, law is not a profession that merely fills files. It is a profession that fills history. It is not simply a system for resolving disputes. It is the grammar through which power is disciplined and justice is articulated. Every nation is ultimately governed not only by those who hold office, but by those who interpret, defend, and refine its laws. If politics is the visible architecture of the country, then law is its invisible foundation. And foundations, as we all know, though unseen, determine whether the structure will endure storms or collapse under pressure. When we examine the arc of history, we find that transformative moments are often midwifed by lawyers. In the United States, the landmark case of Brown v. Board, Brown versus Board of Education, it did more than merely strike down segregated schooling. It actually altered the moral compass of a whole society. In Brown v. Board, equality, the concept of equality, moved from parchment to playground. That litigation, crafted with patience and intellectual precision, told a divided nation that constitutional equality cannot coexist with systematic humiliation. In India, our very own Keshavananda Bharati did something equally extraordinary. It declared that even a sovereign parliament cannot destroy the basic structure. Even, in other words, even a constitutional amendment can be declared unconstitutional. That one line doctrine, born of argument, scholarship, courage, ensured that democracy in India can virtually never be hostage to transient majorities. Those cases remind us that the law, when guided by principle, becomes an instrument of social transformation and not merely one of dispute resolution. India's own freedom struggle offers several compelling testimonies to the nation building power of lawyers, which is part of the main theme today. Mahatma Gandhi was trained in law. His method of satyagrah was at its core a moral argument framed in legal consciousness. Gandhi turned courtroom ethic into a mass moral movement. Nehru brought to politics the analytical discipline of the bar. Ambedkar, one of our most formidable legal minds and founding fathers, converted centuries of social exclusion into constitutional guarantees of equality and liberty. He converted suffering into structure and injustice into institutional reform. The Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, before he unfurled and united the princely states, was a barrister whose courtroom discipline shaped his administrative decisiveness. These were not men or persons who abandoned the law for leadership. They expanded law into leadership. And even in independent India, young lawyers have risen not merely to prominence, but to transformative influence. Law does not whisper, friends, from dusty volumes. It thunders through the ages. Law remembers, leadership imagines, and nation building requires both. There are a lot of examples of lawyers who have successfully leveraged their courtroom acumen into legislative and ministerial leadership, shaping significant national policy. That must always remind us that the courtroom is indeed the rehearsal space for national leadership. Consider then Maneka Gandhi's case, where constitutional advocacy expanded Article 21, the right to life article, into a charter of at least procedural due process. That judgment did not merely protect the passport holder involved, it infused Indian constitutionalism with the idea that the procedure must, externally judged, be just, fair, and reasonable. A single case widened the moral horizon of liberty. Maneka taught us that procedure without fairness is power without legitimacy. Similarly, the global dismantling of apartheid was shaped not only by political agitation, but by the legal training of persons like Mandela, who understood that the courtroom and the constitution could become theaters of resistance. Mandela proved that even a prisoner trained in law, as he was, could cross examine an empire. Incidentally, let me digress for some of the law students. This is a bit of a digression on substantive law. But this Maneka issue and this, it tells you how law is a vibrant, pulsating, non-static concept. It's forever changing. And if you look at our most important article in our constitution, possibly not 21, but 14, but at least both of them are the two most important. You will find how vibrant, dynamic, and ever evolving law and jurisprudence can be. 14, prior to a judgment which had some Tamil Nadu connections called Royappa. Prior to that date in the 60s, in the 70s, I'm sorry, Royappa Article 14 was largely on equality, on the doctrine of classification, that you will not be able to treat equals unequally or unequals equally unless you provide a valid classification and unless that classification is tested to find that it has a reasonable nexus to a larger object sought to be achieved. So it was the equality clause from independence till the late 60s and 70s. Royappa changed that by including a new facet in 14, in the same dead letter of 14, the anti-arbitrariness aspect, which Justice Bhagwati immeasurably expanded through cases and judgments like Ajay Hasya, Ramanna Shetty, and a host of other cases. So by the time we reached Maneka and beyond, we were already having anti-arbitrariness as a full-blooded facet of Article 14, which had only been dealing with equality doctrine prior to Royappa. Post Maneka, we got a third facet added into the same dead letter of the same language of the same article. That was procedural due process, which I've just spoken about. How the procedure to deny or grant the passport to Maneka Gandhi had to be not merely a procedure prescribed, which it was, but the procedure should be liable to be judged independently, to be fair, just, and reasonable, which is nothing but due process. But it was couched, still disguised for a reason, as procedural due process. Actually, it was full-blown due process. Finally, that fig leaf of a camouflage was shed when the fourth facet of Article 14, the same Article 14, unamended, same language, included full-blown substantive due process in the various cases authored by Justice Nariman, Shaira Bano, Triple Talaq, adultery, Joseph Shine, Swiss ribbons, and so on and so forth. Of course, the reason we kept hesitating, law develops incrementally. It develops slowly, but surely. The reason we rightly did it incrementally was because we didn't want both Justice Frankfurter and Mr. B.N. Rao to start turning over in their graves or in their celestial silences too early. Because you know that when B.N. Rao went to America, he was told by a much harassed Justice Frankfurter that whatever else you do in the Indian Constitution, don't include that bloody phrase called due process. Otherwise, due process would have been a phrase in our Constitution as it was born in 1950. So B.N. Rao took his advice. He said gives too much of uncanalized, wide, arbitrary power to judges and deleted that original proposal. And we plucked up the current language of Article 21 from a clause in the Japanese Constitution, except in accordance with procedure with law. So due process was struggling to be born. It was born in Maneka in the late 70s, but still couched as procedural due process, and it has now become full substantive due process, whether both Frankfurter and Mr. B.N. Rao like it from their respective places of silence or not. Friends, young lawyers must therefore see themselves not as technicians, but as trustees. The Constitution does not defend itself. It relies on disciplined minds and courageous voices. When we reflect upon dark chapters, such as, for example, ADM Jabalpur, we are reminded that institutions, including courts, can falter, but courage must outlive error. The eventual judicial acknowledgement of that error demonstrates something equally powerful, that constitutional systems possess the capacity for self-correction when conscience reawakens. The lesson is not to romanticize fallibility, but to recognize that vigilance is generational. Each cohort of lawyers inherits both the triumphs and the mistakes of its predecessors. Friends, leadership in law is not measured by decibel levels or media presence. It is measured by depth, by discipline, and by durability. The finest advocates prepare in silence. They read comparative jurisprudence, they study history, they anticipate counter arguments, they refine their reasoning unless it becomes near unassailable. Scholarship is not ornamental, it is strategic. In Roe versus Wade, the abortion case, and the later constitutional debates in the US, we saw how deeply researched arguments can shape and sometimes reshape social consensus. Whether one agrees with particular outcomes, the enduring lesson is that the law evolves through sustained intellectual engagement, not impulsive rhetoric. Let us go a step further. The measure of a legal system is not how it treats the powerful when they are secure, but how it treats the vulnerable when they are exposed. Law at its noblest is a shield for those without a voice. Around the world, transformative change has often begun with young lawyers like yourselves, who refuse to accept inherited injustice as a permanent reality. In India, public interest litigation expanded access to justice. It brought bonded laborers, under trial prisoners, environmental degradation, gender discrimination, and so on under judicial scrutiny. That movement was not driven by corporate incentives. It was driven by moral imagination and reimagination. Leadership in law also requires the courage to dissent. The finest constitutional systems mature through principled disagreement. Judges, advocates, and scholars engage in a continuous dialogue about liberty, about equality, governance. In that dialogue, your role as young lawyers is to elevate the quality of argument because democracies decline when debate declines. Democracies strengthen when disagreement remains reasoned, respectful, and rooted in constitutional fidelity. Remember that character precedes charisma, though charisma frequently overpowers everything else. Discipline precedes distinction. The habits you cultivate now, meticulous reading, punctual preparation, ethical clarity, will determine whether you merely practice law or personify it. In every generation, a handful of young lawyers rise beyond briefs to become builders of institutions. There is no secret formula. There is only sustained effort, intellectual honesty, and moral steadiness. And also remember the principle that there are many substitutes or maybe substitutes for Harvard, but there is no substitute for hard work. Scholarship is slow fire. It does not dazzle, it endures. The law is a demanding master, but a generous teacher, apart from being a very jealous and a zealous mistress. If you serve it with integrity, it will grant you not only success, but significance. And in the long march or the arc of a nation's history, significance always outlasts success. Ambition is natural in youth, and there is nothing ignoble about striving for success. But ambition without anchor becomes opportunism. The great lawyers remembered by history are not those who merely accumulated victories or notches. They are those who embodied values. Nani Palkivava is remembered not simply for his forensic brilliance in constitutional courts, but for his unwavering commitment to constitutional limits and to constitutional fidelities. Thurgood Marshall in US is remembered not only as a judge, but as the advocate who patiently and meticulously dismantled segregation brick by brick before ascending to the bench. Marshall argued not for applause, but for access. Their reputations endure because they aligned professional excellence with moral clarity. Ambition does build careers, but integrity builds civilizations. The responsibility of young lawyers today extends beyond litigation. There's a whole wide, big world there which was not there when your chancellor did his law in 63, or indeed when I did my law in the early 80s. Regulatory reform, legislative drafting, arbitration, technology governance, environmental protection, human rights advocacy, apart from fancy things like sports law, space law, entertainment law, and so on, are all domains where legal expertise shapes the destiny of millions. The digital age represents new frontiers: data privacy, artificial intelligence, cyber sovereignty. In all these and more, the legal mind must balance innovation with liberty. Nation building in the 21st century will not occur merely in supposedly dramatic constitutional showdowns. It will occur in the careful crafting of frameworks that reconcile growth with justice. Let me also add, democracies rarely collapse in a single dramatic moment. It's not like a collapse of an earthquake, the house comes crashing down. They erode gradually. Democracies erode gradually through normalized excess, when excess becomes the new normal, through institutional fatigue, through the slow corrosion of standards. It is the lawyer's duty to recognize those early fissures. Constitutional morality, as Ambedkar told us, is not a natural sentiment. That's in the debates. He said it must be cultivated. You cultivate it through discipline in argument, civility in disagreement, and courage in adversity. The courtroom is not a battlefield of egos, it is a sanctuary of reason. To enter it either unprepared, of course, is disrespectful, but to enter it without integrity is downright dangerous. Let me also speak to you about something that is rarely discussed in law schools, but in a way is central to leadership, which is another part of the facet of this theme today, and that is loneliness. Leadership in law is often lonely, frequently lonely. There will be moments when the easier argument is more popular, when the louder side commands applause, when compromise seems convenient. Yet history respects those who stood firm when standing firm was uncomfortable. When Keshwananda was argued, there was no certainty that the doctrine of basic structure would emerge victorious. It required sustained courage from both the bench and the bar. Transformative outcomes are rarely guaranteed. They are those which are pursued despite uncertainty. And a lawyer's silence in the face of excess is, according to me, complicity dressed as caution. The relationship between law and leadership is also a relationship between memory and imagination. Law remembers, it records precedents, it preserves institutional wisdom, it ensures continuity. Leadership, on the other hand, imagines, it anticipates change, it responds to new realities, it adapts structures to contemporary needs, and a great or a good lawyer must do both. When technological revolutions disrupt privacy, when artificial intelligence challenges accountability, when environmental crises strain regulatory frameworks, the lawyer must combine constitutional memory with creative foresight. The Constitution is not a museum artifact, it is a living, pulsating compass. Consider how constitutional courts across the world have navigated tensions between liberty and security. After moments of national trauma, governments often expand executive authority. It is during such times that the bar's role becomes most critical. In the United Kingdom, debates following terror attacks tested the balance between surveillance and civil rights. In the United States, cases arising post 9/11 detention forced courts to confront executive overreach. In India, constitutional jurisprudence has repeatedly grappled with preventive detention, free speech inroads, and national security issues. These are not abstract contests. They shape the moral climate of a republic. Young lawyers must understand that defending liberty in difficult times is not fashionable but foundational. Today, Liversidge and Anderson, right bang in the middle of the Second World War, a judgment of the House of Lords, is remembered only for the dissent of Lord Acton, where he had that famous phrase, amidst the clash of arms, the law is not silent. Nobody remembers the majority. Just like H.R. Khanna adorns our courtroom, but nobody remembers the majority in ADM Jabalpur. Power seeks expansion. Law insists on explanation. Where politics builds walls, law is supposed to carve out windows. A transient majority can amend a clause. It cannot amputate a conscience. That's what lawyers have to remember, practice, and vivify. Let me add, and this is particularly apposite, maybe in contemporary times. Let me add that the fear of consequences are often ghosts of the mind. And the moment truly independent judges and fearless lawyers call the bluff of that mental misgiving, they will usually find that it dissolves into nothingness. There is not much which the powers that be can do to such constitutionally protected judges and independent lawyers. For sure, they can ensure that your several ambitions are not fructified, but they cannot take away either your soul or your conscience. Ultimately, when history judges such lawyers and judges, it normally gets its verdict right. The loaves and fishes of high office and of high posts are discounted by history. And it elevates only those to a pedestal who have followed the call of their soul and the voice of their conscience. The Constitution is not self executing, it breathes through brave lawyers. Where fear expands, let reason respond. Where rights shrink, let arguments rise. No discussion of nation building can be complete without economic nation building. Law is the bloodstream of markets also. Contracts, arbitrations, frameworks, insolvency codes, corporate governance norms. These are not dry commercial mechanisms. They are the basic infrastructure of trust. When India undertook economic reforms in 91, it was not only an economic shift, but a very major legal recalibration. The regulatory institutions were strengthened, new frameworks were drafted, and global integration required sophisticated legal architecture. The young lawyer who masters commercial law is not merely drafting agreements. He or she is contributing to national competitiveness and investor confidence. Economic justice and economic growth are both mediated through law. A nation's true wealth is not in its treasury, but also in its jurisprudence. Leadership in the legal profession also demands intergenerational responsibility. You are beneficiaries of institutional capital built by those before you, judges who preceded you, who defended independence, advocates who protected fairness, scholars who enriched jurisprudence. Thank you. I'll take it. This is fine. This is fine. Your conduct, friends, will determine whether future generations inherit stronger institutions or weaker ones. Professional civility is not cosmetic, it is constitutional. When Lawyers reduce discourse to personal attacks. They erode the dignity of courts. When they elevate arguments to scholarship, they enhance the credibility of justice. There is another dimension, ethical restraint. The power of advocacy is immense. A skilled lawyer can influence outcomes, he can shape narratives, can tilt perception. With that power must come the power of natural restraint. The temptation to weaponize procedure, to delay strategically without justification, which is always there for one side or the other in a case, to prioritize spectacle over substance. These are your professional crossroads of your conscience. Each decision either strengthens institutional faith or chips away at it. The true test of leadership is what you do when no one is watching, when integrity is invisible but very, very indispensable. Let me also draw your attention to constitutional backsliding phenomena. Around the world, we have seen democracies strained by polarization, by misinformation, and by erosion of institutional norms. Rarely do these crises begin with tanks on the streets. They begin with subtle distortions. By normalizing exceptional powers, by questioning judicial legitimacy, by weakening checks and balances. In all of this, the lawyer's vigilance is society's early warning system. A vigilant bar is the first line of constitutional defense. Young Indian lawyers have also demonstrated how professional excellence can merge with public service. Some have moved from courtrooms to commissions, from advocacy to academia, from litigation to legislative drafting. They have shaped environmental jurisprudence, gender rights discourse, technology regulation, and human rights protection. They're not lawyers in the strict sense. They're doing these things, which are close cousins but closely interconnected with law. Their journeys illustrate that leadership is not confined to one arena, it is a continuum. What unites them is not uniform ideology, but unwavering engagement with institutional development. You must also, young friends, cultivate intellectual humility. The law is vast, and no one masters it entirely. The greatest advocates continue to learn. They continue to have the curiosity of a child. They revisit precedent, they re examine assumptions, and they refine arguments. In an age of instant opinion, instant coffee everywhere on media and elsewhere, depth becomes either a casualty or revolutionary. Reading widely constitutional history, comparative law, political philosophy, economics, all of this shapes leadership, which demands context. Context transforms argument from mechanical citation to persuasive narrative. And let me emphasize, dissent is never disloyalty. Within the bounds of constitutionalism, dissent enriches democracy. The lawyer who challenges legislation through constitutional scrutiny is not undermining parliament. He or she is actually participating in a constitutional dialogue envisioned by the framers as the bedrock of our system. The tension between institutions, the word tension can be very positive. The tension between institutions, when conducted respectfully, is not a weakness, it's a strength. It ensures equilibrium between all the different organs of state. A cozy, comfort, non tension situation doesn't ensure that. Finally, remember that the law is ultimately about people. Behind every constitutional principle stands a human story. A prisoner seeking bail, a worker seeking wages, a woman seeking equality, a citizen seeking dignity. Leadership in law is not abstract, it is profoundly human. It's not an ivory tower profession. When you argue a matter, you carry not just legal propositions but lived realities. If you can combine technical mastery with empathy, you will not only persuade courts, but you will also elevate justice. The republic we inhabit, friends, is dynamic, diverse, and demanding. It requires lawyers who are intellectually fearless, ethically grounded, and institutionally loyal. If you commit yourself to discipline, to scholarship, to the courage of your convictions, you will discover that law offers not merely a career, but a calling. And when the story of this generation is written, may it be said that its young lawyers did not succeed merely. They strengthened the nation they served. In the end, your legacy will not be measured by the number of reported judgments bearing your name. It will be measured by whether institutions were stronger because of your actions and your service to them and to causes. Did you elevate the discourse? Did you protect the vulnerable? Did you resist expediency when principle demanded patience? Did you see law merely as a ladder for personal ascent or as a bridge for collective progress? Friends, despite being the world's largest democracy and a proud one at that, India does remain an unfinished republic. It's a constitutional experiment, constantly and always in motion. Each generation writes new footnotes to that founding document made by our founding fathers. You, the young lawyers of today, will write many of those footnotes. The river of law flows continuously. It reflects the sky of its times, but it also shapes the land through which it is flowing. You are not mere observers of that river. You are its future navigators, its custodians, and when necessary, its reformers. Friends, if you combine scholarship with service, ambition with integrity, and courage with humility, you will discover that law is not merely a profession you practice. It is a nation which you help build. And when your generation is judged, it should be said they did not merely practice law, they practiced courage. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, that applause could carry on for a little longer. And we made a promise before Dr. Singhvi started speaking that we will open the house to one and all for questions. So we do that now. Kindly do raise your hand and we'll have a microphone sent out to you. And we'll have a hand microphone brought out for Sir. That's sweet.
Good afternoon.
We've got quite a few hands that went up. There's one right there.
Good
Yes,
afternoon,
please.
sir.
Let them introduce themselves. Could you please introduce yourself
Yes.
before you ask your question? Thank
Good
you.
afternoon, sir. My name is Ashish Raj, and having 8 months of experience of practice,
Can you be a little louder, please?
having 8 months of experience of practicing before Delhi High Court, I have noticed that when the clock hits 5 p.m., the court leaves without completing the cause list. Now, as sir, you have mentioned Article 21, and sir, I mentioned 5.5 crore cases being pending. My question is, isn't current 10 to 5 schedule a direct violation of fundamental right to a speedy trial for a common man?
You must, yeah, you must speak close to the mic because I missed some part of your question. But
My
what I
apologies.
understand is, why do judges leave at 5 o'clock without finishing their cause list?
Yes, sir.
Now, that's truly a very nitty-gritty question after all the heights we have been flowing for the last 1 hour. But my favorite topic for the last 25 years is the topic on which your chancellor spoke:
Yes, sir.
reforms in the administration of justice, the battle of the bulge, the scourge of arrears. But that is a separate topic. Maybe there'll be some question on it. Having said that we have huge areas, you must also remember that judges in India work harder than possibly any of their counterparts anywhere on planet Earth.
S-
Uh, as a generic, I mean, individual judge may not work hard here, individual judge may work hard in USA, but as a collectivity, no breed of judges in any part of planet Earth works harder than India. So you should not grudge them. By the way, the court time in most places is 4:15 or 4:30. And some places it's 4:30 actually. In our country, in Delhi, it's 4:30. So 5 o'clock is already in excess. There is no point in continuing till you finish every matter because they're not finishable. Every member of the bar understands immediately when a judge is doing his best, when he's working hard, versus where and when a judge is a shirker. So the bar is the best judge of such judges. So I don't think you should you should grudge them that part of it at all.
Thank
By the way, uh, with all our areas, what we decide in, well, if you include both the miscellaneous cases and the final, what we decide in 1 week in the Supreme Court, a US Supreme Court decides half of that in a year.
Yes.
Hello, sir. This is Nikita. Loud whatever you said, and that has actually inspired me to ask this question. That recently CJI had showed concern about the Class 8 book, where it has been given that how corruption exists even in judiciary, and has appealed to remove that part, saying it lowers authority of court and it weakens the trust of the people. But my question is, in 2025, we have seen one of the judge from Delhi High Court, and my simple question is that how do you see it? I mean,
Yes, yes. Well, first of all, uh, the disclaimer I always make is when I've appeared in a case, please take anything and everything I say with a bucket full of salt. So I am one of the counsel in this case, both the days I appear in this case, this NCRT case you're talking about. Secondly, I think it is being misunderstood as to what the reaction or anger was about. There can be no two views about the fact that there are black sheep in the judiciary as there are in every other sector, and that the C word is a very major issue. After arrears, it is probably the second major issue in the judiciary. That was not the issue at all. There were two issues, and one of them I articulated very openly. Many of the newspapers, including the Hindu, in fact, did a whole side part on that aspect. Uh, and that is the selectivity of this 2-page chapter. It suddenly, out of the blue, for class 8 students, plucks out for the first time 2 pages on judiciary, doesn't seek to deal institutionally with corruption, doesn't seek to deal institutionally with corruption, which is rampant in the bureaucracy, in the political class, in politicians, in so many other sectors of our system, and plucks out and places it out of context as if it is targeting one. That was a matter of concern. Second was the fact that, and this is still under investigation, so I won't want to go into the details, that possibly this was introduced in the minutes of meetings, suddenly out of the blue without careful scrutiny from the top, in which case it could possibly be the agenda. This is still out for the jury to decide. It could possibly be the agenda of some people to weaken, threaten, intimidate, control, or overhaul the judiciary. The second one is still undergoing some file checking. They're going to produce the files next time. But certainly the selectivity is inexcusable. And if you tell class 8 students across the country repeatedly that this one sector on this table on the left side is got a corruption problem, but none of these sectors here you talk about, by the time they reach 8, 9, and 10, they're going to get this is not you and me, it's class 8. They're going to get a somewhat distorted and warped view of how ultimately the organ, and by the way, there's a third facet, ultimately the organ which has defended liberty, private rights, stood as a bulwark against government excesses, that part is not mentioned anywhere. So it's an incomplete, inchoate, and possibly targeted insertion.
also, sir, I have second question if I can ask.
There are multiple people who'd like to ask questions, ma'am. So I think we just in the order of being fair to the others, we'd like to pass that microphone on to some of the others. We've got one right here. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. I am Asram Shmunu from VIT School of Law, 4th year. So, sir, my question is, what is your opinion on the usage of AI in legal education, and how does the modern approach to legal education has differed from the traditional approach in which you were trained, sir?
Oh, it's a sea of difference. You know, probably 33% of what you can or are being taught in schools were not available to us. We had not heard of cyber law, AI law, uh, sports law, entertainment law, a whole range of technology law. In fact, because of my exertions, now you teach as a taught subject reforms in the administration of justice, which was not taught in those days. So you can take it that there's a sea change in the menu card available for people like you compared to people like me or your chancellor. Many of these options were just not there. They were the traditional hardcore subjects of contract, constitutional law, etc., etc. Secondly, AI has come to stay. I mean, I don't think there is any if question left about AI. It is a very simple answer as far as AI is concerned. It's a very valuable, indeed a remarkable tool. Just like nuclear power, it has to be used constructively, positively, but always as a slave, never as a master. As long as you are the boss and that remains a slave, it's of great utility. I don't think you can undermine the utility merely because if you let it go haywire, it becomes the master. Well, that's your fault. It's you who have to be always in the saddle. The best horses are unruly, but they need competent, talented riders.
Thank you, sir.
We have another question, please.
Good afternoon to everybody. Sir, today is a National Science Day. It's a very important day. I am Ramesh Kumar. I am a science communicator working with the science communication and for the common man. My question is there any specific role of science and technology in today's legal framework? My second important question, even to Dr. Vishwanathan as well, because he is leading a great institution, VIT. Is there any framework for the GM issue, genetically modified issues, which a law can play an important role? This is my question.
So, very briefly and pointedly, of course, science and technology are now permeating every part of our legal profession, of legal academia. Science and technology, in fact, may be too generic and too broad a theme which you have formulated. Subparts, subspecializations within that larger rubric are now being taught very specifically, and that's a very good thing. The interface between how ultimately all science and technology major issues have to be controlled by regulatory legal frameworks. So wherever you see all these law being taught, cyber, this is all Data Protection Act. These are all methods of controlling or regulating or providing the effects and consequences of science and technology in a manner that they are not deleterious to society. So this, your first part is it's just everywhere, and much less of it was there in my time or his time. Your second part is surprising you're asking that because genetically modified crops or genetically modified varieties have been part of jurisprudence for over 20 years. I have done most of the leading cases in them. I've been appearing for that company's name, I forget, the first fellow who came here. In many cases, from Supreme Court to Nagpur to, so some they have already introduced some crops, some are under introduction. There is a whole committee for it. So, and that goes through 5 or 6 processes and then comes to courts. And there are a number of PILs. So there again, GM is both a scientific, technical concept, but is heavily regulated in law, both by the statute, but after you cleared all the hurdles by PILs. So it goes through an additional judicial scrutiny through PILs. And I've done many of the cases myself.
Interesting insight. Another
Yeah,
That was the word. He's right.
a very good afternoon to you, sir. I'm Professor Dr. Shuchi Mehra, the head of the Department of Management Studies at Chandigarh Group of Colleges, CGC University now. Just out of curiosity, I'd like to know, like when the matter is listed in the court and it goes to the judge, I think with all their experience and every day they go through all these cases, they get to know what will be the decision and the result of that particular matter. Then why all these matters, like they have been, the decision has always been delayed, and both the parties have been given the long dates and it has been
Well,
prolonged.
you see, your question is narrow. I'm not really responding to your very narrow question, but it really touches upon the larger issue of delay, which the chancellor talked about. So let me spend a couple of minutes. It's a very, it is a theme long enough for a seminar or a whole day lecture. One can speak about it, so we don't have time to discuss it like that. But let me give you very quickly a few facets. Our country has the most avant-garde, progressive, greatest inventions of law. Nobody has PIL, nobody has basic structure. We are considered the inventors of such major doctrines, and other countries have followed us. We also have the best and the brightest in law, both on this side and on the bench. And yet we have to hang our head in shame only because the scourge of arrears, which is now after uh, almost 25 years of reports, committees, recommendations, commissions, actually doubled. And we used to give the excuse of COVID. Now the COVID excuse is wearing thin because in the COVID period it went only up to 3.25 crores. It is now beyond 5.5 crores. So this is something which is terrible. All the best and brightest in our professions, the great doctrines of law, the great sermons, the great judgments are nullified. And there is a complete denial of human rights. There is no doubt about it. In fact, I always say that what required is to take up 5 or 10 solutions and uninterruptedly implement them over 10 years. You'll start finding results. Instead, we keep on discussing. I mean, my favorite joke is a committee is a group of the unfit appointed by the unwilling to do the unnecessary. So you will have yet another committee giving the same recommendations. So you just postpone it. Secondly, what happens in our country is that we have zigzags. So he has a very good proposal. His proposal has 5 points, but when I succeed him, I want to put my own stamp. So I put another 3 points and I dilute his 2 points. And then when he comes, he does the same to my proposal. So therefore, the synergy of continuity is lost. The answers are simple. One, judges. Under Supreme Court directions repeatedly, we have climbed from 11, 12 to 20 per million of population. He's talking of 150. Minimum should be 50 per million of population. So you just have to have more judges. You cannot have excellent hospitals, fantastic equipment, but no doctors. Number two, at any point of time since independence, at any point of time, remember for a country which is now the largest, but in those days was second populous after China, we have this low judge per million population. But of that low judge to million population, that's very important to understand. So this 20 is the total pot of appointments potentially which you can make are 20 per million. But of those, since independence at any point of time, 1/3 of all High Court posts has been vacant. High Court is only 1100 in a country of this size. At any point of time, 300 to 350 are vacant. At any point of time, out of the 22 or 24,000 of our lowest judiciary, 1/4 are vacant. 1/3 for the High Court, 1/4 for the lowest judiciary. Now, it doesn't require rocket science to start appointing people in time. I know the date of his retirement on the date he's appointed. 2 weeks before he retires, I should appoint his successor. The reason again is very simple. We first know the people we have to appoint in this room. And having identified those 5, we then start finding ways of disappointing them, not appointing them. That is pure politics. And let me tell you, the politics of the judiciary will make the politics of parliament blush. I mean that. I've said it many times. So, if you have a system like that where you know the best 5 lawyers in this sofa, the best 5 lawyers in that sofa, the best 5 lawyers, then you start finding the worst 5 because of politics. Then what do? Then, of course, there are various other things. You need uh, to increase, to jack it up to double the number. You need to have uh, ad hoc people appointed. Supreme Court has done me great honor by citing my article in a footnote. There's a provision in the Constitution which allows retired judges of that same court to be appointed. It's never been used in the High Court till now for 75 years. It's been used in the Supreme Court 5-6 times. Now they're trying to appoint somebody. Because what happens is when he retires, you start this appointment, disappointment exercise, takes a long time. But you already have a retired chap there who's a tried and tested chap who can sit as an ad hoc judge. Then you have to have a simplification of procedure and you appoint well. By the way, quantity is a very major fallacy. You appoint 100 judges and 80 of them are poor, inefficient, not good. Then they only add to arrears. You need to have hands-on judges. There are so many other things. You started with night courts. You had in some states, then they fizzled out, fast-track courts. So it's not difficult. It's a house of cards. Do you know, if you have a proper computerized system in this country of all these 5.5 crore cases, and you start giving notice on that computerized format, I believe personally that at least 1/3, maybe even close to half, will be infructuous. A man has died, his family has moved on, he has retired, there is nothing left in the case. There are only numbers on the file, but there's no tracking. What gives us a bad name? Each high court has 5, 7, 10, 20 cases which are 20 years old, 10 years old. Why can't the high court put those cases first and finish off the 10-year-olds? Every high court should have at least 2 tracks. Track 1, which maintains keeping abreast of current filings. And track 2, system of judges should be only dealing with arrears. And start with the 20-year-old ones, then the 10-year-old ones, the 5-year, you'll be actually down to 3 to 4 year pendency if you do it in a methodical manner. But it's quite amazing with all the commissions, committees, we don't have the will to continuously implement it. As I said, it can be a much larger answer, but I've already taken time.
Well, the candid comments coming through from Dr. Singhvi. We've got time for just that one last question now. And I'm sure the young man there is going to make it count.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Singhvi. I'm here. I had a quick question. Doctrine of stare decisis or the law of precedence has been crystallized in judicial history over time. And you spoke about Article 21 and how it is the most important articles in our constitution. Long incarceration in jail is a gross violation of Article 21. It is a settled law upheld by laid down by the Supreme Court in Hussaina Khatun and many more judgments. And this has also been followed by the Supreme Court in many stringent cases like the UAPA or the PMLA. My question to you is, the recent inconsistent finding of the Supreme Court in the case of Umar Khalid has been
The case of?
Umar Khalid has been facing a lot of criticism due to the inconsistent stand taken by the Supreme Court, although it is a settled law. So my short question to you is, what was the minuscule line that made the top court deviate from the settled law? And how can we, as an institution, move forward to crystallize doctrine of precedent?
Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
Doctrine of precedent, of course, does not mean that it's a one-size-fits-all. Unfortunately or fortunately, cases will differ according to the factual context of the case. So a principle of law which is stare decisis or doctrine of precedent will never be giving you a solution for an individual case which will turn on its facts. So merely deciding on facts is not violating stare decisis. However, what is happening in our country, especially as you go higher, is a feeling of subjectivity and infallibility, which is making more and more judgments like the chancellor's foot. So some chancellors in England had big feet, some had very small feet. So they would decide cases upon the size of their feet, which led to this phrase chancellor's foot. which means that we have to rein in subjectivity. Now, unfortunate but true, and I've been saying it, that we do not have one Supreme Court, just in case you are mixed up about that. We have at least 12 to 14 Supreme Courts in those 16 courtrooms. Now, that kind of subjectivity leads to inconsistency, because then you show me the color of your hair and I'll show you the kind of judgment. Thirdly, the lower courts have been traditionally a little hesitant to give liberty-based bails because of another trend in our country, a very easy way of taking a swipe at the judges that they have been compromised. So judges tend to think that, look, if this kind of allegation we have to face, then better err on the side of denial. As you go higher, that disappears, but then inconsistency comes in completely. And the biggest creator of that inconsistency, unfortunately, is frequently the Supreme Court. Because all the courts below have to look at the Supreme Court. Now you find conflicting 3 or 4 orders, you take your pick. So in a nutshell, the answer to your question is, in liberty bail matters, the narrow concept which you are asking about, bail the rule, jail the exception must be followed consistently. Variations of that must be corrected immediately. Bail the rule, jail the exception has been followed in special statutes. Normally it is a rule anyway, but special statutes means with special anti-bail provisions. Once you satisfy them, you should be able to. And now there is a new dimension which has been repeated in many of the cases I've had the privilege of assisting the court. Unduly long incarceration by itself becomes a ground, irrespective of a special anti-bail provision in a statute like PMLA, Narcotics Act, UAPA, etc., which are special anti-bail acts. There, repeatedly courts have said you must release because of sheer length of incarceration. Now, unfortunately, there are aberrations which are then plucked up and they multiply. There is nothing I can say to that. I think this has to be controlled. Judges have to be sensitized, and judges have to be told that they cannot have their subjective view.
Thank you so much, sir, for your insights. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all that time will permit us to do in terms of the Q&A session. At this point of time, I'm going to request Mr. N. Ram, Director of the Hindu Group, to please present a small memento to our chief guest for the function, Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi. Sir, thank you so much for being here today, for enlightening a lot of young minds with ideas and thoughts. Can we have that memento brought out? And I'd request Mr. N. Ram, Director of the Hindu Group, to please acknowledge the presence of Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, please. We always say the pen is mightier than the sword. That's the reason why the pen there as well. Thank you, sir. At this point of time, I'm going to request Dr. G.V. Selvam to please also present a small token of appreciation to Mr. N. Ram as well, please. Could you please do the honors? Dr. G.V. Selvam, presenting a small token of appreciation shawl to Mr. N. Ram. Thank you, sir.